Supply cutoff? Boeing. Trump threatens to restrict export of Boeing aircraft parts to China. When Donald Trump brandished a draft executive order at a campaign rally, shouting to cut off the Boeing supply chain, no one expected that this seemingly targeted trade war against China's large aircraft industry would first ignite an economic powder keg in the United States itself. Industry data shows that if Boeing loses key component supplies, it is projected to face a massive loss of $5 billion in 2025 alone, a figure that is not only 3 times the short-term total losses of China's 3 major airlines but also equivalent to 4.7% of the Seattle region's annual GDP. Workers on Boeing's assembly line held overnight protests. Wall Street analysts urgently downgraded ratings for the aerospace manufacturing sector, and even the Pentagon rarely spoke out with a warning. This will directly threaten the U.S. military's transport aircraft upgrade plan. Why has this meticulously designed supply cutoff card become a double-edged sword piercing the heart of American industry? Has the butterfly effect of the global industrial chain already surpassed the sand table deductions of politicians? To understand this, we must first grasp a key point. Aircraft parts are 100 times more precise than the parts in your refrigerator, and over 1 million components must be sourced from more than 70 countries globally. It is like the blood vessels in a human body. Even a small blockage can lead to a heart attack. 1,855 Boeing aircraft in China need maintenance, and U.S. suppliers depend on this business. A supply cutoff is simply stabbing each other. What is even more astonishing is that amid the haze of rising trade barriers, Airbus has already completed a meticulous strategic layout. The Tianjin final assembly line, like a precisely functioning giant gear, entered a frantic capacity expansion mode in 2024, breaking through its initial monthly capacity of 6 aircraft to double that in just a few months, setting an industry record with a staggering pace of 12 A320neo series airliners per month. This deep integration of made in China and European intelligence allowed Airbus to seize a dominant 62% market share in China's new civil aviation procurement market in 2024. This near-monopoly performance directly rewrites the structure of the global aerospace manufacturing industry. Even more dramatic is that while Trump was brandishing the supply cutoff stick at the trade negotiation table, Airbus executives were repeatedly toasting at private celebratory dinners. The so-called trade sanctions, far from containing their competitor, became a divine assist for Airbus to expand the Chinese market, effectively handing over Boeing's original home field advantage. This silent war ultimately devolved into an absurd script of the competitor's performance soaring. Next, let's dissect 3 truths. Why were the 16 years of bitter trade war lessons between Europe and the US wasted? Was Boeing's lifeline actually cut by itself long ago? Where is the signal that the global aviation industry is on the verge of change? Trump using Boeing as a bargaining chip is a move the Europeans tried 20 years ago, and they lost everything. In 2004, Europe and the US started the aircraft subsidy war, with the US accusing Airbus of receiving $22 billion in illegal subsidies, and the EU counterclaiming that Boeing received $23 billion. The WTO wrangled for 16 years, eventually ruling that the EU could impose $3.99 billion in tariffs on the US. At the time, Boeing was just reeling from the 737 MAX crisis. The added tariffs led to the loss of 200 orders in 6 months, and even Scotch whiskey was an innocent casualty. After the US imposed a 25% tariff, whiskey exports to the US plummeted 32%, resulting in a loss of $470 million. Now, Trump is repeating the same trick. Has he forgotten how Boeing begged the government to stop the tariffs back then? The harshest truth hidden in this case is that the aviation industry is a symbiotic body, and whoever strikes first bleeds first. When the US and Europe were at each other's throats back then, both companies nearly went bankrupt, and ultimately had to sit down and negotiate. Trump assumes China has no alternative, but he deliberately ignores that Airbus has already built its production line on China's doorstep. This political maneuver, trading corporate lives for political capital, is essentially throwing the gold standard of Made in America into the gutter. It is shockingly short-sighted. Boeing's decline was foreshadowed, and Trump is merely accelerating its demise. During the Obama administration, China purchased 678 Boeing aircraft over 4 years. This dropped dramatically to 56 during Trump's first term, and only 20 during the 4 years of the Biden administration. Even more fatal is that Airbus has completed the encirclement. In 2024, China's active Airbus fleet numbered 2,233 aircraft, nearly 400 more than Boeing, and with the new Tianjin production line operational, 20% of the world's A320s are now built in China. On the very day Trump made his announcement, one airline immediately returned 2 Boeing 737 MAX aircraft, each worth $55 million. This is not leverage. It's pushing Boeing off a cliff. Changes in market data often intuitively reflect industry trends. In recent years, Chinese airlines' orders share for Boeing has fallen from 25% to 5%, indicating a shift in the market landscape. In contrast, Airbus chose to establish factories in China, a localization strategy that effectively reduces trade risks and has successfully captured 20% of the global market share. When business decisions are excessively influenced by non-market factors, companies may face the challenge of losing market share, and Boeing's current predicament is perhaps confirmation of this phenomenon. The worst hit are the U.S. domestic suppliers. Trump is pushing them toward ruin. GE Aviation, which produces the LEAP engines for the Boeing 737 MAX, relies on exports to China for 18% of its revenue. If the supply is cut off, its annual profit could be slashed by a quarter. It's important to remember that the aircraft parts supply chain is more complex than a spider web. A small screw might pass through processing in 3 different countries. Once China stops, U.S. suppliers' parts cannot be sold, and the inventory backlog will drag down the entire industrial chain. The 2018 trade war already tested this once, leading to the collapse of 17 Boeing suppliers. Another round now would have unimaginable consequences. The so-called leverage Trump claims can move the Chinese market is essentially the sword of Damocles hanging over the head of the American manufacturing supply chain, and a noose around the necks of domestic suppliers. He selectively ignores the reality that the U.S.-China aerospace industrial chain has long been deeply symbiotic. China's COMAC C919 assembly line needs GE Aviation's LEAP-1C engine to operate, and Honeywell's avionics systems are widely used in China's civil fleet. Yet, the revenue these U.S. giants derive from the Chinese market is equally staggering. In 2023 alone, GE Aviation's revenue in China exceeded $4.2 billion, and Honeywell Aerospace's exports to China accounted for 18% of its global business. Should the extreme policy of cutting off supply be implemented, U.S. suppliers will immediately face a triple crisis. Firstly, a cash flow rupture, as the 30-monthly 737 MAX orders delivered after its re-entry into service in China concealed the survival lifeline of hundreds of U.S. small and medium-sized enterprises. Secondly, overcapacity, as aerospace component factories located in Kansas may be forced to shut down due to the loss of Chinese orders. And thirdly, an even more severe stagnation of technological iteration, as the accelerating cooperation between China's COMAC and Europe's Airbus means U.S. companies will miss the opportunity for technological verification in the world's largest aviation market. History offers a clear warning. The U.S. chip supply cutoff to China in 2019 instead forced the Chinese semiconductor industry to achieve a 14-nanometer process breakthrough. A rash supply cutoff in the aerospace sector now is highly likely to repeat the same mistake, plunging American manufacturing into a vicious cycle of self-destructive decoupling. This short-sighted policy, which harms others without benefiting oneself, is contrary to the America First slogan and is essentially America self-destructing by drinking poison to quench thirst. The global aviation industry no longer plays a unipolar game. Trump is still living in a Cold War dream. The CEO of Airbus stated it plainly. It is the most foolish thing to tie politics and airplanes together. Now China's COMAC has risen, with C919 orders surpassing 1,000, and while it cannot replace Boeing immediately, Airbus is capitalizing on the opportunistic gains on the sidelines. The EU has long seen this situation clearly, negotiating with the US while quietly expanding cooperation with China, signing agreements with 10 Chinese suppliers in 2024 and moving parts of its industrial chain to China. Trump wants to manipulate others through a supply cutoff, but will ultimately drive away all allies and markets. Behind this is the inevitable choice of the global industrial chain. Whoever pursues isolation will be abandoned. Airbus's global layout has proven that establishing factories at the market's doorstep and away from political disputes is the way to thrive. Trump's move against the trend will not only cause Boeing to be completely defeated by Airbus, but will also lead to the US losing its dominance in aerospace manufacturing. More alarmingly, this weaponization of trade will trigger a chain reaction, prompting other countries to build their own supply chains, eventually isolating the US. After reading this, you should understand, there are no winners in a trade war, and treating technological products as political bargaining chips will inevitably backfire. Boeing's tragedy was not caused by China. It was dragged down by short-sighted political maneuvering.